You're watching the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekday Outlook from Monday, September the 28th through Friday, October the 2nd. Alright, as we near the end of September into October, we are seeing a very messy pattern in the southeast region. And that has a lot to do with these high pressures to the north and low pressures to the south sort of sandwiching into our area. Right now we still have this low pressure off of our coastline along the tail end of this frontal boundary that has been sticking around here for days and days. Seems like it will never end. And we have a couple of areas to watch. Now we have these two areas here and here. Now this is Invest 99L coming up from the Yucatan and across the Gulf and is expected to head in this general direction up into the Florida coast. The upper level shear environment coming up from the south around this mid to upper level low pressure is creating a lot of shear on the western side of this low, so we're expecting most of the convection and rain activity to stick around this area along the eastern and northeastern side of this low pressure. That means, luckily for the coastline of Florida, it will not develop into a tropical storm or a hurricane. And the bad news is that it's going to create a lot of rain up into this area up through Georgia and into South Carolina. So we're looking at additional rain later on in the week from this area right here. Is Invest 99L as of right now. It could be a depression by the time it makes landfall. We also have this mid to upper level low pressure here scooting along the coastline of Florida and is expected to head in that general vicinity as well. So we're not away from the clouds and the rain yet. It looks like it's going to be another messy week for us here in South Carolina. Now we do have this high pressure ridge built here to the north, and it's driving east-northeast and easterly winds down into the southeast region, and it seems to end right about at the North Carolina-South Carolina border where this low pressure offshore bends the wind field more northerly. So we're going to keep the offshore winds going for another day today and possibly switch up to a southerly flow tomorrow. It's just making for a very tricky situation. We do have another frontal boundary heading down into the south, into the Midwest United States, and ultimately down into the southeast region by later in the week. By possibly Thursday it could arrive here as high pressure to the north. I want to take a look at this. So this high pressure to the north is wedging down behind this frontal boundary, and it's going to be building in very quickly from the west and pushing this boundary through to our area. Now, whether or not it connects with this mid to upper level low and gets a little more juice, we have yet to see. But the main thing is that this high pressure is going to go on a track somewhat similar to this, and then it's going to actually stay up in Canada and grow and build up in this area. So the winds that we'll get from that high pressure will not be as prominent or moderate as the ones that we've been seeing lately, the ones that have been in the northeast United States and down into the Jersey, New York areas. So we're kind of lucky in that sense because this high pressure will stay to our north. So that means the winds will weaken. So we look to have sort of a southerly flow behind the exit of this low pressure as it goes along this boundary to the northeast. We'll get a very weak southerly wind field from it. So we'll say today we'll have sort of a north or north-northeast wind, and it bends to east-northeast as the day goes on, but we're looking at a very weak wind field, probably at or below 10 knots. As we get into tomorrow, we see a little bit of a southerly wind field as this low pressure draws up the coastline. We'll see a little bit of a south wind heading up ahead of it, and we'll stay again at or below 10 knots, and that goes on through Wednesday. And as we get into Thursday, we start to see the effects from this high pressure as it builds down over the Great Lakes and then swings back up into Canada. We'll see sort of a north-northeasterly wind field enter the picture and into Friday, and the build will be highly dependent on whether or not this frontal boundary clears the coast completely. If it stalls just inland of Charleston, we could see a residual southerly flow stay ahead of it. If it pushes just off the coastline, this wind field is going to be more northerly because of short waving offshore once it hits the water. Okay, so that's our local weather. We do have Tropical Depression 11 that was just named last night, 11 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center. This is expected to drift to the west and then to the north, so we're not expecting any kind of landfall. I do believe that the environment for Tropical Depression 11 right now is favorable. However, there is some upper level shear diving down from the north, which is expected to keep the western side of this low a little bit sheared off. So ultimately, this boundary, we're expecting 11 to get caught up along the boundary and then drift back off to the east. And also, as this boundary dives down, it should be the 1-2 punch to bring whatever's left of Tropical Depression 11 up in this area away from land. So that should not be a threat. Okay, so if we look at the SPC Mesoscale Analysis, this is one of the maps that I like to use to see where low pressures are. And again, with the low pressure off or near the shoreline right here, we see this wind field up here in North Carolina. It has a fairly strong gradient going on. We're looking at mid to upper teens, maybe even some 20s in some areas. And that gradient remains from the high pressure to the north, driving down those northeasterly winds. However, when we get down into the south, as we've been seeing for the last few days, these low pressures that sit out here tend to bend the wind field. So we've been having more of a northerly flow wrap around this wind field, offshore flow. So that's been the case, and it also weakens the wind field as the gradient is not strong. The gradient needs to be stronger in this area in order for winds to come up, and there's just not enough of a gradient in our area to bring winds into the moderate levels. We've seen modest peaks and valleys here and there, but for the most part, we're not going to see anything past 10 knots today. I don't believe. We may have one little surge in the afternoon, and that's about it. So that's for the low pressure offshore, very weak. If we look at data scope from weather flow, I want to go there, take a quick look at what's going on, and we can see up in North Carolina this easterly flow. We're seeing some low, mid-teens, and even some upper teens pulses in the Sound and Pimlico Sound. Even offshore buoys are reading some of the higher gradients. As we get down into the North Carolina border, that's where the gradient tends to drop off. We have a little bit of a gradient here at Winyah Bay Range. That's a little bit more protruded out off of the South Carolina coast as the final cape down from the North Carolina area. So here we are zooming into Charleston. We're seeing a light to somewhat modest flow in the harbor where there's a little bit more water for the wind to settle down over. And here's our model outlook for today. I want to take a quick peek at that. This is the Isle of Palms Pier. This could be indicative of Sullivan's Island and Folly Beach for today as well. I'm not expecting very much to happen on any of the beaches. Now, once again, here's our HER 3 kilometer, which is the higher resolution in the red. And we see some jumpiness in the wind field, and that's probably going to be likely. And you see most of the speeds are staying right at or below 10 knots. There is one little peak in the afternoon. We'll keep it right there. I'd say 7 to 11 knots northeast winds with the east-northeast lean along afternoon sea breezing. Very mild with the land heat. Since there's going to be so much clouding in the area, things will stay cool overall. And that will do for the Charleston area and the winds. Now, if we look at Charleston radar, we see widespread showers coming up from the south, sort of culminating out here over the ocean and heading up and along the coastline. Some of this is scatter around Statesboro, around where the ground zero is for the radar. So you can see that there's already some scattered showers and rains going on, especially right along the coastline. It looks like Sullivan's Island Palms are getting a little bit of a dusting right now, probably some very light drizzles. So expect that on and off all day long, possibly some areas of convection, and that will be pretty much the norm for the day. Now, if we look at the tropics, when we take a look at the tropics, here we go. We got kind of an active, period going on right now. Here is Invest 99. This is coming up from the Yucatan Peninsula and is expected to head towards the north. The Air Force Reserve reconnaissance aircraft is scheduled to investigate this low this afternoon if necessary. So we'll wait to see what they say. They're giving us a 40% chance for the next 2 days and 40% chance for the next 5 days as it heads generally to the north and then north-northeast and northeast up into the Florida coast. If we look at, okay, here's Tropical Depression 11, nearly stationary. It's only moving northwest at about 2 knots. The track for this is to take it a little bit west and then more north again. We also have Tropical Depression Ida out here, which is not listed on this map. It may not be a depression any longer. It may just be a remnant low, but it could come back as a depression at any time. It's just hanging on barely by a thread out there. I want to look at the earth.nullschool.net winds and kind of look at these areas and show you what's going on. So here is Tropical Depression 11 off of our coast, or northeast of the Bahamas. And the environment here is we have these easterly trades driving it just a little bit to the west. Here's that high pressure ridge that typically is a little bit further south over towards Bermuda. So this is an Atlantic ridge that is driving those easterly trades across and driving this system a little bit westward. As we go up in the upper levels, we go up to 500 millibars, which is about 16,000 feet or 18,000 feet. We see that the mid-level environment is somewhat conducive. We see a little bit of a northerly wind driving down. That is going to keep those cloud tops sort of off on the western side of this low pressure. Now, another thing that we see is where this circle is, that was the surface low pressure. The mid-level low pressure is not balanced over the center. So we have a displaced low pressure from the west to the east, and that is not healthy for a system to develop, because we need that mid-level over the top of the surface for good exhaust to go up to the upper levels. And if we look at the upper level winds, this is about 34,000 feet. Let's see what those winds are doing for the upper level shear. And here we go. So here's our winds are from the northeast driving down, and that's going to keep that western side of this low pressure rather dry and weak, as the cloud tops favor the eastern side of it. All the convection will probably stay along the eastern side, and maybe even the southern side where the cloud tops are being blown down and around. Now over here, this is about where Invest 99L is, coming off the northern Yucatan Peninsula. You can see these upper level winds really cutting across from the west-southwest, and that's why they're not favoring this storm to develop into a tropical storm or a hurricane, is because of this upper level shear environment from the mid and upper level low pressure coming off the Texas coast right now. So once again, most of that convective activity and rains will be staying along the eastern side and northeastern side of this depression once it forms, as it heads up towards the Florida coastline and into the southeast region. Elsewhere out here, this is about where Ida is, and you can see the upper level wind environment. There's some shearing going on from the southwest. It's just not a favorable environment for Ida, and I would actually put Ida more about here, and the track for Ida is probably going to take her a little bit swooping down to the west-southwest around this upper level low here, and then probably get sheared apart in this environment. So not looking too good for any of the storms that are developing right now or trying to develop. Here's 99L. This is coming off the Yucatan. You can see the surface low right about here. You can see how dry it is. There isn't really any convection or storm activity wrapped around it. And you can see the eastern side where the cloud tops are developing. If we look at the rainbow tops with the convection, here's the center of circulation right here. And you can see all the blobs of convective activity off on the eastern and northeastern side of this low. And here's your upper level shear with these clouds sort of streaming up from the southwest across the western side of the surface low. Okay, here is the track guidance for 99L, and we see it heading up into the Florida coast, maybe the Pensacola area. Most of the central focus is right about here, so we'll have to keep an eye. Once it hits this area, we're expecting that frontal boundary, and you can see that swoop in the tracks from that point. That's where that frontal boundary sweeps into the southeast and pulls whatever it is along it up to the northeast. Okay, here is Tropical Depression 11. Here's the focus tracks for Tropical Depression 11, expected to drift off to the west and then ultimately to the northwest and then north-northwest and be up here by Wednesday and get caught up along that frontal boundary that's sitting offshore, and then probably pulled away by this weekend by whatever's left of it, whatever's left of it by the frontal boundary dropping down into the southeast region. Okay, here's the visible for Tropical Depression 11, and once again you can see some activity trying to get wrapped around a center right up here. Most of this convective activity is down to the south as those northerly winds coming down. You can see sort of a spray of clouds coming down from here. This northerly winds driving down and pushing those cloud tops to the south of it, but it does look starting to get kind of that comma look, and we'll have to watch and see what happens. So here's the rainbow color imagery on that. And there's a little bit of outflow going on. You can see most of this outflow is off to the eastern side because of that displaced up mid-level low. So we'll wait and see what happens there. Ida, very poorly organized, barely a surface low any longer. It may have been downgraded to a remnant low as of today, and here's the current track. They have it staying as a depression as it swoops to the west-southwest and ultimately over here to the west by Tuesday. So we will watch those as well. Okay, that will do it for the Chucktown Wind Report, and have a good day.